You'll never find someone like me." Vanessa's words hung in the air, bold and unshaken, like she had just etched them into the walls of our living room. Her tone was laced with that signature pride of hers, the same pride that had once been captivating but had grown into an oppressive weight over the years. She stood by the door, her hand resting on the knob, her back straight, her chin slightly tilted upwards. She was daring me to flinch, to plead, to falter in the face of her parting shot. But I didn't flinch. I didn't even look up from the half-empty glass of scotch I held in my hand. I just swirled the amber liquid, watching it catch the light as if it held all the answers I needed. Maybe it did. "That's the idea," I murmured, not loudly enough for her to catch the words, but just enough for me to hear them echo back in my mind. The door closed with a definitive thud. Not a slam. That wasn't Vanessa's style. Even in her anger, she was calculated, precise. She wanted me to hear her strength, not her fury. And I did. I heard it loud and clear. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't just letting her leave. I was letting her disappear. The house fell silent, but not the kind of silence that soothes. It was the heavy, suffocating kind. The kind that crawls under your skin and settles in your chest. I sat there for a while, still holding the glass, staring at the door like it might swing open again, like she might walk back in with another quip, another barb to throw my way. But I knew she wouldn't. Vanessa was too proud for that. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. This wasn't the first time she had walked out. Oh no. Vanessa had perfected the art of leaving. Over the years, she had walked out over arguments about money, about her job, about my lack of ambition, as she so often put it. But this time felt different. This time, I didn't chase after her. And that's what she wasn't expecting. You see, Vanessa thrived on control. She knew how to turn a fight into a performance, how to make her anger look justified and my silence seem like guilt. She knew how to make herself the star of every scene, the hero in every argument. And for a long time, I played the part she assigned me, the contrite husband, the man who swallowed his pride and begged for forgiveness, even when I wasn't wrong. But tonight, I wasn't playing anymore. I got up and walked over to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to watch her walk to her car. She was still poised, still composed, her heels clicking against the pavement with a confidence that said, "I've already won." I wondered if she would pause, if she would glance back at the house, maybe hesitate for just a second. But she didn't. She got into the car, started the engine, and drove away without a single look back. I stood there for a while, watching the empty street, the glow of her taillights fading into the distance. A part of me expected to feel something, regret, sadness, anger. But all I felt was relief. Relief. It surprised me, honestly. For years, I had dreaded the thought of her leaving. I had convinced myself that losing Vanessa would be the worst thing that could ever happen to me. But now that it had finally happened, it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like freedom. I turned away from the window and walked back to the living room, setting the glass of scotch on the table. The silence didn't feel so heavy anymore. In fact, it felt lighter, almost peaceful. I sat back down in my chair, letting the quiet wrap around me like a warm blanket. She thought she had the upper hand. She thought her departure would leave me scrambling, broken, desperate to win her back. But what she didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment for months. I wasn't scrambling. I wasn't broken. And I certainly wasn't desperate. Vanessa believed she was irreplaceable, that I would never find someone like her. And maybe she was right. Maybe I wouldn't. But that was the point. Her leaving wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the beginning of something new. Something better. I picked up the glass of scotch again, raising it slightly as if to toast to the empty room. "To freedom," I whispered, taking a sip. The night stretched out in front of me, quiet and unbroken. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Vanessa was gone, and with her, the weight of a marriage that had long since stopped being a partnership. And as I sat there, alone in the silence, I realized something. I wasn't letting her leave. I was letting her disappear. And I had no intention of looking back. When Vanessa left, I didn't just sit there sipping my scotch for hours in silence. I mean, sure, I enjoyed the initial quiet, that fleeting sense of relief. But when the echoes of her clicking heels and that final door thud faded into memory, I couldn't help but reflect. Not out of longing or regret, oh, no, but out of a need to understand how we had ended up here. When did it all begin to crumble? Was it our first year of marriage? Or maybe it was even earlier, before the wedding, before the vows. The signs had been there, like tiny cracks in a glass that you only notice after it shatters. I just hadn't wanted to see them. I remember the first time Vanessa introduced herself to me at that charity gala years ago. She was magnetic, confident, radiant, the kind of woman who commanded attention simply by existing. And she had picked me. Me. I used to think that was the ultimate compliment, that her choosing me validated my worth. I was just an average guy with a decent job, a modest home, and a predictable routine. Vanessa, on the other hand, was larger than life. And when she wrapped her arm around mine and called me hers, I felt unstoppable. But over time, I realized she wasn't just magnetic. She was controlling. It wasn't love she had given me, it was ownership. Slowly, Vanessa started shaping me into the husband she wanted, not the man I was. She'd say it was for my own good, that she was helping me grow. It took years to realize that what she called growth was really about making me smaller, more pliable, easier to fit into her narrative. I let it happen for far too long. I can admit that now. I let her dictate everything, what we ate, where we went, who we spent time with. Even my job, which I used to take pride in, wasn't spared. Vanessa never missed an opportunity to remind me that I could be doing more, earning more, being more. And every time I tried to push back, to reclaim a little space for myself, she would find a way to twist the conversation until I was the one apologizing. Oh, and let's not forget her talent for grand gestures. Vanessa was the queen of public affection, not because she loved me deeply, but because it made her look good. She'd shower me with compliments in front of friends, throw extravagant parties to celebrate our love, and post curated photos of us on social media with captions like, "Forever my partner in crime." People thought we were the perfect couple. Hell, I even believed it for a while. But behind closed doors, it was a different story. There were moments that still make my stomach turn, when I saw the real Vanessa. Like the time she berated me for an hour because I bought the wrong brand of coffee. Or the time she told me I was embarrassing her at her work event because I wasn't engaging enough with her colleagues. Or the countless times she'd make snide comments about my family, calling them simple or boring. And then there was Andrew, the man who was supposed to be her colleague, her work husband, as she liked to joke. I ignored the red flags at first, chalking up her late nights and sudden secrecy to her demanding job. But when I found the text messages, when I read the words she sent him, words that she had never said to me, it all clicked. Vanessa had been eroding our marriage long before I had the chance to save it. I didn't confront her right away. Maybe that was cowardice, or maybe it was strategy. I needed time to process, to figure out my next move. A part of me wondered if she would come clean on her own, if there was still some shred of honesty left in her. But Vanessa didn't work that way. She thrived on appearances, and admitting to an affair would have shattered the perfect image she had spent years cultivating. So, I waited. I listened. I watched as she carried on like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't completely betrayed me. And in that time, I began to see her for what she truly was. Not the magnetic, radiant woman I had fallen for, but a master manipulator, a narcissist, someone who loved the idea of being married more than she loved me. And tonight, as she walked out that door, it wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the end of her control over me. For years, I had played the role of the passive husband, the man who bent to her every whim. But not anymore. You know, it's funny. Vanessa always accused me of being too predictable, too safe. But I wonder if she saw this coming. I wonder if she realized that her pride, her arrogance, her need to always be in control, would be the very things that would destroy her in the end. As I sat there, staring at the empty space she left behind, I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel sadness. I felt clarity. The kind of clarity you only get when you stop lying to yourself, when you finally admit that some people don't deserve second chances. Vanessa thought she was irreplaceable, that I'd never move on. But what she didn't realize was that I wasn't looking for another version of her. I wasn't looking for someone like her at all. And as I sat there, swirling the last sip of scotch in my glass, one thought kept echoing in my mind. Sometimes, the best way to win is to let them think they've won. When Vanessa left that night, I could almost hear the confidence in her footsteps as she walked to her car. To her, this was a fresh start, a triumphant exit, a declaration of independence. She believed she was the protagonist in some grand narrative, shedding the dead weight of a mediocre husband like me to pursue a more glamorous life. And the most ironic part? I let her think that. I wanted her to believe she had won, that she had made the choice to walk away. But what Vanessa didn't realize was that her new beginning wasn't going to be the fairy tale she imagined. It started exactly as I predicted. Vanessa didn't waste time wallowing or second-guessing her decision. She had always been someone who thrived on quick transitions, moving seamlessly from one chapter to the next. Within days, she had moved into Andrew's luxurious apartment, a sleek penthouse in the heart of the city. I'm sure she told herself it was a reward for all the years she had put up with me, a place that matched her self-proclaimed standards. And Andrew? Oh, he was everything Vanessa wanted on paper. Wealthy, successful, charming in that slick, corporate way. The kind of man who drove a car that cost more than most people's annual salary and never seemed to have a hair out of place. To Vanessa, he was the ultimate upgrade, a shiny new toy that validated her decision to leave. I could picture them together, sipping champagne on his rooftop terrace, Vanessa laughing a little too loudly at his jokes, draping herself over him like a trophy. She'd post pictures on social media, of course, filtered and curated to perfection, with captions like "New Beginnings" or "Living My Best Life." But the thing about Vanessa was that she didn't just want better. She wanted to be better. She thrived on competition, on proving to the world that she was superior. And Andrew, with his polished lifestyle, was just another tool for her to show off. At first, everything seemed perfect for her. She had her shiny new life, her picture-perfect partner, and a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in years. She probably thought she'd finally won, that she had left behind the mediocrity of our marriage for something extraordinary. But new beginnings have a funny way of revealing old flaws. The cracks started small. Vanessa's confidence, though unshakable on the surface, was built on a fragile foundation of pride and insecurity. She needed constant validation, and Andrew, polished and ambitious as he was, wasn't the type to offer endless praise. He was focused on his own career, his own image. To him, Vanessa was just another accessory to his success, not the center of his universe. And then there were the whispers. It didn't take long for Vanessa to discover that Andrew wasn't exactly the perfect partner she had imagined. He had a reputation, a history of short-lived relationships, of women who had come and gone like clockwork. Vanessa wasn't special to him. She was just the latest in a long line of carefully selected companions. But Vanessa, being Vanessa, refused to acknowledge the red flags. Instead, she doubled down. She poured herself into their relationship, trying to prove that she could make it work, that she could be the one to tame Andrew. She threw lavish dinner parties, bought expensive gifts, and reinvented herself to fit his world. And for a while, it worked. Or at least, it looked like it did. But I knew Vanessa too well. I knew that her pride wouldn't let her admit when things weren't going as planned. She would push through, pretending everything was perfect, even as the weight of her choices began to crush her. And then, the inevitable happened. Her past started catching up with her. I had been quiet, keeping my distance, but I wasn't idle. Before she left, I had made sure to gather every piece of information I could. Financial records, emails, even a few private messages she thought she had deleted. I didn't use them right away. No, that would have been too easy. Instead, I waited. I let her settle into her new life, let her believe she was untouchable. And then I began planting seeds. A carefully placed email here, a quiet conversation there. It didn't take much. Vanessa's world was already built on a shaky foundation. I didn't even have to lie. The truth was more than enough. People started asking questions, rumors started spreading, and Vanessa's shiny new life didn't seem so shiny anymore. It wasn't long before Andrew started pulling away. For a man like him, image was everything, and Vanessa was starting to look like a liability. The lavish dinners became less frequent. The compliments dried up. And one day, she came home to find him gone, his side of the closet empty, a terse note left on the counter. Need some space. Don't call me. Vanessa's new beginning had become her worst nightmare. She had traded one life for another, only to find herself alone and adrift, with no one to blame but herself. And me? I watched from a distance, not with satisfaction or malice, but with clarity. Vanessa had always believed she was the architect of her own destiny, that she was untouchable. But the truth was, she had built her empire on sand. And now, the tide was coming in. If Vanessa had believed her new beginning with Andrew was untouchable, she was sorely mistaken. But you see, I wasn't interested in dramatic takedowns or public confrontations. That would have been too obvious, too messy. My approach was subtle, surgical, a quiet dismantling of everything she held dear. And the best part? She never even saw it coming. Vanessa's pride was her greatest flaw, but it was also her blind spot. She had always believed that the world revolved around her, that her charm and wit could shield her from consequences. So, while she pranced around Andrew's penthouse, throwing parties and flaunting her upgrade, I worked in the shadows, carefully and methodically. It started small, almost unnoticeable. I knew Vanessa well enough to understand that her greatest fear wasn't losing things. It was losing control. So, I made sure that the first cracks were ones she couldn't easily explain away. Take her job, for example. Vanessa loved to brag about her position as a senior manager at her firm, using it as a badge of superiority. But what she didn't know was that her impeccable reputation at work wasn't as bulletproof as she thought. Months before she left, I had quietly collected emails, documents, and anything that showed her less than stellar work ethic. Missed deadlines, harsh feedback from colleagues, and even a few poorly concealed errors that I had made sure to highlight subtly. One day, an anonymous email found its way to her boss. Just a simple suggestion to look deeper into some irregularities in Vanessa's performance. It wasn't enough to get her fired outright. No, that would have been too fast, too easy. Instead, it planted a seed of doubt, one that began to grow. Suddenly, her boss wasn't so quick to praise her. Opportunities started slipping through her fingers. Promotions she thought were a given went to other people. And Vanessa, always so sure of her abilities, found herself questioning if she was losing her edge. Then there was her social circle. Vanessa thrived on being the center of attention, the friend everyone envied. Her social media was a carefully curated gallery of her perfect life. But what happens when perfection starts to unravel? I reached out to a few people, friends who were always just a little too eager to gossip, too willing to share. I didn't have to tell them much, just enough to make them curious. Did you hear about Vanessa and Andrew? I heard things aren't as perfect as they seem. Rumors began to spread, quietly at first, then louder. Friends she had considered allies started pulling back. Invitations to brunches and events became fewer. And Vanessa, who had always been the life of the party, found herself on the outside looking in. Andrew, too, wasn't spared. I had learned enough about him to know that his world revolved around appearances. To a man like Andrew, even the slightest hint of scandal could be a deal-breaker. So, I made sure that Vanessa's growing instability became impossible to ignore. A well-timed phone call here, a casual comment there. It wasn't long before Andrew started seeing her not as an asset, but as a liability. And then came the finances. Vanessa had always been reckless with money, a fact she tried to hide from everyone, including me. She loved to spend, to splurge on things she didn't need, all in the name of maintaining her image. What she didn't realize was that I had quietly documented every penny she owed. Credit cards maxed out, hidden loans. She thought she was clever, but I was always one step ahead. The final blow was a letter from the bank, informing her that one of her joint accounts had been frozen. She probably thought it was a mistake at first, a minor inconvenience. But as the letters piled up and the calls from creditors started coming in, she realized it was more than that. She couldn't keep up with the bills, the lavish dinners, the designer clothes. Her perfect life was starting to crumble, piece by piece. And the beauty of it all? Vanessa couldn't pinpoint where it was coming from. To her, It probably felt like the universe was conspiring against her. She had no idea that I was the one holding the strings, orchestrating her quiet downfall with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony. By the time she started noticing the pattern, it was too late. Her job was hanging by a thread. Her social circle had grown cold, and Andrew was starting to pull away. She was trapped in a spiral of misfortune, with no one to turn to and no way out. I didn't feel guilt, not even a little. This wasn't about revenge, it was about balance. Vanessa had spent years taking from me my time, my energy, my dignity, and now she was paying it all back, one subtle sabotage at a time. And the best part? I didn't have to lift a finger to finish her off. She was doing that all by herself. It didn't happen all at once. Vanessa wasn't the type to immediately acknowledge when the walls were closing in. No, she was far too proud for that. At first, she chalked up her setbacks to bad luck, a missed opportunity at work, a misunderstanding with a friend, or a minor financial hiccup. She didn't want to admit there was a larger pattern, because admitting that would mean facing the possibility that she wasn't in control anymore. But as the cracks grew wider, as her carefully constructed world started to crumble, Vanessa began to realize something was wrong. Something, or someone, was working against her. It started with Andrew. To anyone else, he would have seemed the perfect partner. Tall, polished, with a confidence that made people stop and listen when he spoke. Vanessa had always admired that about him. Or maybe it was more accurate to say she admired what he represented. Success, power, the ability to elevate her above the mediocrity of the life she had left behind. But Andrew wasn't as enchanted with Vanessa as she had hoped. The first signs were subtle. A distracted glance when she spoke, a sigh when she asked for his attention. Then came the missed dates, the long hours at work that conveniently kept him out of the house. Vanessa might have ignored it if it weren't for the growing distance between them. He didn't seem to want her anymore, and that terrified her. One night, she decided to confront him. She cooked an elaborate dinner, something she'd seen on a cooking show, complete with wine pairings and handmade desserts. She wore her best dress, the one that used to make his eyes light up, and plastered on a smile as she waited for him to come home. But Andrew was late, and when he finally walked through the door, he barely glanced at her before muttering, "I'm not hungry," and heading to the bedroom. That was the first crack in her armor. The second came at work. Vanessa had always taken pride in her career, in being the it woman at her office. She loved the power, the authority, the respect, or at least the illusion of it. But lately, things had shifted. Meetings went on without her. Projects she used to lead were reassigned, and her boss seemed colder, more distant. She tried to ignore it, blaming office politics or her colleagues' jealousy. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. Then came the email. It was anonymous, of course, but it cut straight to the heart of her insecurities. Does Vanessa even deserve her position? Ask her about the missed deadlines and the botched reports. Her boss didn't confront her directly, but she could feel the shift in how he spoke to her, the way he watched her during meetings as though waiting for her to slip up. She started second-guessing herself, making small mistakes she never would have made before. The once unshakable Vanessa was losing her footing, and the people around her could see it. The final blow came from her finances. Vanessa had always been reckless with money, but she'd hidden it well. At least, she thought she had. But now, bills were piling up, her credit cards were maxed out, and her once expansive wardrobe had become a source of shame rather than pride. Letters from the bank started arriving, and she could no longer ignore them. And Andrew? He wasn't interested in helping. When she finally worked up the courage to ask for financial support, his response was icy. "I'm not your safety net, Vanessa. Handle your own problems." That's when it hit her. Sitting alone in their once shared apartment, surrounded by unopened bills and unanswered messages from former friends, Vanessa realized that her world was falling apart, and it wasn't just bad luck. No, this felt deliberate, targeted. She started replaying the events in her mind, tracing back the series of misfortunes, the frozen accounts, the whispers at work, the growing isolation, and slowly, reluctantly, her thoughts turned to me. Could it be? Could I be the one pulling the strings, orchestrating her downfall from the shadows? At first, She dismissed the idea. I had always been predictable, as she so often liked to remind me. I wasn't capable of something like this, or so she thought. But as the days went on, the doubt grew. She started noticing the patterns, the precision with which her life had unraveled. It couldn't be a coincidence. One night, she stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, her once flawless face now marked by the stress she could no longer hide. "Michael," she whispered to herself, the name tasting bitter on her tongue. For the first time in her life, Vanessa felt powerless. But her pride wouldn't let her admit defeat. Not yet. She decided she had to confront me, to prove to herself that I wasn't behind this, that I was still the passive, forgettable man she had left behind. And if I was responsible, well, she would deal with that too. Vanessa didn't know it yet, but by the time she worked up the courage to face me, the game would already be over. When I heard the knock on my door, I wasn't surprised. I had been waiting for this moment, knowing Vanessa's pride would only let her spiral so far before she came looking for answers. She wasn't the type to accept failure quietly, and she definitely wasn't the type to believe her misfortunes were her own doing. No, Vanessa needed a villain to blame, and tonight, that villain was me. I took my time answering the door. Not out of malice, but because I wanted to savor the moment. I poured myself a glass of water, straightened the books on the coffee table, and finally, when I was ready, I opened the door. There she was, standing on the porch, looking like a shadow of the woman I once knew. Her usual poise and confidence were gone, replaced by a frantic energy that made her seem smaller. Her makeup, which she used to apply with the precision of an artist, was smudged, and her hair was pulled back in a hurried bun. She looked exhausted, as if the weight of the world had finally caught up to her. "Michael," she said, her voice sharp but shaky. "We need to talk." I stepped aside and gestured for her to come in. "Of course," I said, my tone calm, almost welcoming. "Would you like a drink?" She ignored the question and marched into the living room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She didn't sit down. Instead, she stood in the middle of the room, arms crossed, glaring at me like I was a puzzle she couldn't solve. "What did you do?" she demanded. I raised an eyebrow, feigning confusion. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Don't play dumb with me, Michael," she snapped. "You think I can't see what's happening? My accounts are frozen. My job is on the line, Andrew." She stopped herself, her voice faltering for a moment before she caught it. "Andrew is pulling away, and I know you're behind it." I leaned against the armrest of the couch, taking a sip of water as I studied her. "That's quite the accusation," I said, keeping my voice steady. "What exactly do you think I've done?" Her eyes narrowed. "You know exactly what you've done. The emails, the rumors, the bank accounts. Don't pretend this is some cosmic coincidence." I set the glass down and clasped my hands together. "Vanessa, I haven't done anything to you that you didn't do to yourself." Her face twisted in frustration. "Don't give me that self-righteous crap, Michael. You've been sabotaging me. Admit it." I stood up, taking a step closer to her. "You want me to admit something, Vanessa? Fine. I'll admit this. I stopped caring about protecting you the moment you decided I wasn't good enough for you. You walked out that door, believing you'd find a better life, and I let you go. Everything that's happened since? That's on you." She stared at me, her mouth slightly open, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. For a moment, there was silence. Then, she laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You think this is my fault?" she said, her voice rising. "You think I deserve this?" I didn't flinch. "I think you made choices, Vanessa. Choices have consequences." Her laugh faded, and she took a step toward me, her finger pointing accusingly. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Sitting here in your little house, watching me fall apart. But let me tell you something, Michael. You're still the same pathetic man I left. You haven't won anything." I smiled, a small, subtle smile that I knew would drive her crazy. "Haven't I?" She froze, the weight of my words sinking in. For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. "You know, Vanessa, you always believed you were untouchable, that you could manipulate people, step on them, and walk away unscathed. But the truth is, you built your life on a foundation of lies. And now, it's crumbling. She shook her head, her voice trembling. You're cruel. I tilted my head slightly. Am I? Or am I just honest? For years, I let you control me, belittle me, make me feel like I was less than you. But not anymore. You walked out of this house believing you were the victor, but all you did was give me the freedom to show you who you really are. She stared at me, her expression shifting from anger to something that almost looked like fear. For a moment, I wondered if she was going to lash out, to throw something or scream. But instead, she turned away, her shoulders slumping. I thought you loved me, she said quietly. I did, I replied. More than you'll ever know. But love isn't supposed to hurt, Vanessa. And with you, it always did. She stood there for a moment, as if waiting for me to say something more, to offer her a lifeline. But I didn't. I couldn't. This was her reckoning, and it wasn't my job to save her from it. Finally, she turned back to me, her face a mix of defiance and defeat. You'll regret this, she said, her voice low. One day, you'll look back and realize what you've done. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The truth was, I had no regrets. As she walked out of the house for the second time, the door closing behind her with a soft click, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. She thought she had confronted me. She thought she had regained some semblance of control. But what she didn't realize was that this wasn't just the end of her power over me. It was the end of her story in my life. And for the first time, I didn't look back. Vanessa's life didn't collapse in a dramatic explosion. It was more like a slow-motion implosion, one brick falling after another, until all that was left was rubble. I knew her well enough to see it coming, but even I couldn't have predicted how far she would fall. And the final blow? Well, I'd been holding on to that for just the right moment. Losing her job was the first major crack in Vanessa's facade. She had spent years priding herself on being the ultimate career woman, the one who could command any room with her charm and intellect. But when whispers about her missed deadlines, her sharp tongue, and her questionable decisions began to circulate, her untouchable image started to crumble. Her boss, once eager to champion her, became distant. Projects she used to lead were handed off to colleagues she considered beneath her. Meetings happened without her. And then came the email, a formal request for a performance review. Vanessa tried to fight back, of course. She wasn't one to roll over easily. But the evidence was there. Some of it planted by me, sure, but most of it was just the truth she thought she could hide. When she was quietly asked to resign, she didn't argue. She simply packed her things and walked out, head held high, telling herself she'd bounce back in no time. Except she didn't. Without her job, Vanessa's social circle started to shrink. She had always been the center of attention, the one throwing lavish parties and organizing weekend getaways. But when the invitations stopped coming, when the group chats went silent, she realized how conditional those friendships had been. At first, she tried to pretend nothing was wrong. She posted carefully curated photos on social media, captions filled with optimism and positivity, excited for what's next, or reinventing myself, one step at a time. But even her online persona began to fade as the reality of her situation became impossible to ignore. The people she thought were her friends disappeared, one by one, until she was left with nothing but empty wine glasses and memories of a life that no longer existed. Andrew was supposed to be her safety net. He was the reason she had walked out of our marriage with such confidence, the glittering prize that made leaving me seem like the obvious choice. But Andrew was never in it for the long haul. As Vanessa's life unraveled, so did her relationship with him. At first, it was subtle. Canceled dinner plans, a growing distance in his voice when he spoke to her. Then, one day, she came home to find his side of the closet empty and a note on the kitchen counter. I need some space. Don't contact me. Andrew was gone, and with him went the last shred of stability in her life. Vanessa had always lived beyond her means, using credit cards to fund her extravagant lifestyle. But now, without Andrew's money or her job, the bills began to pile up. Letters from creditors filled her mailbox, and phone calls from collection agencies became a daily occurrence. Her accounts were frozen. Her credit cards were maxed out. And when the eviction notice came, Vanessa was forced to pack up her designer wardrobe and move into a rundown studio apartment in a part of town she once would have sneered at. She tried to reach out to me. I'll never forget the email she sent. Short, desperate, almost pitiful. Michael, I know you hate me, but I need your help. Please. I stared at the screen for a long time, my finger hovering over the reply button, but then I closed the email. I didn't respond. Vanessa didn't give up, not entirely. Even as her life crumbled, she clung to the belief that she could still turn things around. But what she didn't realize was that I wasn't done yet. The final blow wasn't a grand act of revenge. It was a quiet, calculated move that left no room for recovery. Before Vanessa left me, I had made sure to document everything. Her spending habits, her hidden debts, even the messages she thought she had deleted from Andrew. I used that information sparingly, planting seeds of doubt in the right places, ensuring her downfall felt natural, inevitable. But the last piece of the puzzle was a document she had signed without reading. Back when she was too busy planning her new life with Andrew to care about the details of our divorce settlement, that document ensured that everything she thought she had taken from me, our house, our savings, even her car, was still legally mine. When the notice arrived at her new apartment, informing her that the bank was repossessing her car and freezing what little remained in her accounts, Vanessa finally broke. She called me that night, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. You planned this, didn't you? She accused. I didn't deny it. I didn't plan anything, Vanessa. I just stopped protecting you from yourself. There was silence on the other end of the line, and then she whispered, You'll regret this. But I didn't. Vanessa disappeared after that. She stopped posting on social media, stopped trying to claw her way back into the life she had lost. The last I heard, she was working a low-paying job, living paycheck to paycheck, and avoiding anyone who might remind her of what she used to be. And me? I moved on. Not with a new relationship or a grand new life, but with peace. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Vanessa had always believed she was untouchable, that she could manipulate and control her way through life. But in the end, it wasn't me who destroyed her. It was her own choices, her own pride. The final blow wasn't just the loss of her possessions or her reputation. It was the realization that she was no longer the woman she thought she was. And as I sat in my quiet house, enjoying the life I had rebuilt, I knew one thing for certain. Letting her go was the best decision I had ever made. When Vanessa disappeared from my life, I thought I'd feel triumphant, that her downfall would bring some sort of victory. But it didn't feel like a win. It felt like silence. A silence so profound that at first, I didn't know what to do with it. The chaos she had brought into my life, the arguments, the manipulation, the endless push and pull, was gone. For a while, that silence was unsettling. But then, slowly, I began to see it for what it was, peace. The first step was reclaiming my space. Our house, once a monument to her tastes and desires, became mine again. I redecorated, threw out the things that reminded me of her, and filled the space with pieces that reflected me. I painted the walls a lighter shade, letting in more light, and cleared the clutter that had always made the place feel suffocating. Then, I started reconnecting with myself. For years, Vanessa had chipped away at my confidence, convincing me that I wasn't enough, never ambitious enough, successful enough, or even interesting enough. But with her gone, I realized how much of her narrative I had internalized. I rediscovered my passion for work, throwing myself into projects that excited me. Promotions that I once thought were out of reach suddenly felt attainable. I reconnected with old friends, people Vanessa had pushed away because they didn't fit into her idea of the perfect life. I even started saying yes to new experiences, hiking trips, poker nights, and once, a spontaneous road trip to a town I'd never heard of. Each step forward felt like shedding another layer of the man she had tried to mold me into. I wasn't her husband anymore. I was just Michael. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Vanessa, on the other hand, faded away. The last I heard of her was the desperate email she sent me, begging for help. Michael, I know you hate me, but I don't know where else to turn. Please. I stared at that email for a long time, my finger hovering over the reply button. Part of me wanted to respond, to throw her a lifeline just to see if she would take it. But then I closed the email. I didn't respond. What could I have said? That I was sorry? I wasn't. That I forgave her? Maybe, but forgiveness didn't mean I owed her anything. She had made her choices, and she was living with the consequences. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was living in a tiny, run-down apartment on the other side of town, the kind of place she once would have sneered at. She had a low-paying job, just enough to scrape by, and she kept to herself, avoiding anyone who might remind her of the life she had lost. It was hard to imagine the Vanessa I had known in that setting, the woman who had once strutted through life, as if she owned the world now reduced to obscurity. But the truth was, Vanessa had always been her own worst enemy. I didn't destroy her. She did that herself. One day, while cleaning out a closet, I came across an old photo of us from our honeymoon. We were on a beach, the sun setting behind us, smiling as if we had the world figured out. At first, I felt a pang of nostalgia, but then I looked closer. Her smile was dazzling, of course, but her eyes, they told a different story. Even then, she was looking for something more, something I could never give her. I put the photo back in the box and closed it. The past was the past, and it didn't belong in the life I was building now. My life now is quieter, simpler, but in the best possible way. I've learned to appreciate the little things. The way the morning light filters through the windows, the sound of rain tapping against the roof, the satisfaction of a job well done. I've started seeing someone new. Not a whirlwind romance, but something steady and genuine. She's kind and grounded, and most importantly, she doesn't try to change me. Being with her feels like breathing fresh air after years in a smoke-filled room. As for Vanessa, I doubt I'll ever see her again. She's vanished into the background, her once bright light dimmed to a flicker. The last I heard, she had moved to another city, trying to start over. But starting over is hard when you're running from yourself. She's probably still out there, clinging to the belief that she'll make a comeback, that she'll reclaim the life she lost. But deep down, I think she knows the truth. Vanessa's greatest enemy wasn't me, or Andrew, or the world. It was her own pride. Sometimes, I wonder if she was right when she told me I'd regret this. But the truth is, I don't. Letting Vanessa leave wasn't about revenge. It was about freedom. Her downfall wasn't my victory, but it was my closure. It showed me that I could move on, that I could rebuild, that I didn't need her, or anyone else, to define my worth. So, no, I don't regret letting her go. I don't regret letting her disappear. Because when she walked out of my life, she didn't just leave me. She set me free. And for that, I'll always be grateful.